Okay, should be good to go. Thanks.
Cool. And
Good
then
deal.
Dave, I made you host again.
Oh, thank you. Awful nice of you. Okay, well, it looks like we're recording, so let's go ahead and get the show on the road. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Wolf. I am, for those of you who don't know who I am, that makes a lot of sense because I probably haven't met you. But I've been training and hanging out with CKDF for the last couple of years. We've gotten into a whole bunch of shenanigans together, and in these uncertain times, I think we all have decided that having some kind of creative sword outlet weekly has been a really great idea. And this talk was its genesis was in a conversation I was having with Marlene a couple months ago, and I had gotten really excited about sword and buckler fencing, and Marlene suggested that maybe I should do a talk, and I was like, well, maybe not like a lecture, but certainly I could facilitate a discussion. And so here we are, and I hope everyone learned something this evening. I'm sure I will, and I'm very excited for that prospect. Full disclosure, right? Disclaimers up front. I'm by no means an expert in sword and buckler fencing. I've only been researching it seriously for the last few months. I've come up with some interesting findings, which I am excited to share with you all. And as we over the course of the next 90 minutes, as we discuss some of the gory particulars of sword and buckler fencing, I do encourage everyone, no matter what your skill level with sword and buckler fencing is, to interject, ask questions. Feel free to participate as much or as little as you want. This really is an exploratory discussion that we're a part of here. This really isn't. Ideally, it won't be me just yakking at you for 90 minutes. If that's what you want, that's fine. I'm sure I could figure out something to say for 90 minutes. But I'd really prefer not to. So with that said, again, just to reiterate, if you happen to have more experience with sword and buckler fencing and you want to point something out, or recommend a resource, or talk about sources or whatever, feel free to do so at any time. I can't imagine there's not so many of us in here that we can't just probably just call it out. But if you feel like you need to like raise your hand or something, go ahead and post in the chat so we can get you, so that we're not all talking over each other. So for my part, I'd like to start with what sword and buckler fencing is. I tell you what, let me go ahead and I'm going to turn my video on here so you can all see my smiling face. Good evening. How are you? This is also not a requirement. You don't have to turn your video on. If you want to, that's great. I'm sure all of you have lovely faces and we'd all love to see them, but if not, that's fine too. But the reason I'm doing this is because there are some things that I'm going to want to show you. I've got some visual aids set up here that I would like to present over the course of the talk here. So when we talk about sword and buckler fencing, one of the first things we talk about is one of the oldest sources that we have in HEMA, which is known as the Wall Purges textbook, or the 133 manuscript. Some of you might know what that is. If you don't, then come along with me on an amazing adventure. So I have a copy of a translation here by Jeffrey Forgang. This is not a flex. I just have one, and it's a really great translation. These are also readily available, I think, for a pretty decent price. Some of these HEMA books can get kind of pricey and a little hard to find, but this one wasn't. I think it was actually pretty easy. If anybody knows anything about a good, reliable place to get them, post a link, shout it out, whatever. But this particular translation, The Medieval Art of Swordsmanship by Jeffrey Forgang, is probably one of the most complete and comprehensive translations of the Wall Purges textbook that you may find. There are others, and I'm actually looking at the Wall Purges textbook page on Wiktenauer right now, which is also a great resource if you aren't familiar with Wiktenauer, and how are you not by this point. Wiktenauer is a great resource, and it is a free resource as well. That's one of the nice parts about it. Some of the sources, of course, may not have translations, or may not have translations of the translations, right? There's no, not necessarily glosses for everything, but a lot of that information is there and is available for general consumption, which is great. But back to 133, right? So 133, and it is 133, right? You might hear folks say it's like I-33. It's the Roman numeral 1, right? And then 33. This is a naming convention that was in place while the manuscript was sitting in the Royal Armories at Leeds. And so that's how it's also been come to know, Manuscript 133. 133 has got kind of an interesting history. It's one of the oldest and most complete fact books that we have in HEMA. Scholars have dated it to around 1300. I think 1320 is kind of the best guess for how old this thing is. And as old as it is, it's also really amazing how much of it we still have. I think of the 36 or so pages of this particular effect book, we're only missing like 4, which is pretty incredible. The information that we do have, the plates that are depicted, are also reasonably comprehensive as well. They are, there's pictures and there's words, which is awesome. You don't always get that with some of the older effect books, like Talhofer, for example, right? Lots of pictures, very few words. But this is interesting and also kind of unique in that it is, you get the best of both worlds. 133 is also, it's written in Latin primarily, but there is some German sprinkled in there. So that also gives us kind of an idea of where it came from. Go figure, right? It's a German tradition. So some of this information will be, I think, more easily gleaned than not, right? It's not like we have to go learn Italian for all your Fiorists out there. Sorry, I don't know of any Italian sources for Sword and Buckler. They may exist, but I have no idea. Let's briefly let's talk about some of the other sources that we have for Sword and Buckler. 133 is probably the one that everybody thinks about when they think of Sword and Buckler fencing, and there are, this was interesting for me to find out, there actually there are a few more. I think among those are Lignitzer. I think Lecoukner talks about it a little bit, and then I believe that Talhofer also gets into it. The depictions of Sword and Buckler fencing from those manuscripts are different necessarily because they come from a later time period, and so you might notice that some of the implements, right, some of the weapons and the bucklers themselves look rather different. For show and tell, I do have a couple examples of some historical type weapons. For example, in the 133 manuscript, you might see a blade like this. This is an Oakshot Type 14. It's from Purple Heart Armory, by the way, in case you guys are getting super envious of it, and can be had for a reasonable price. I promise this is not a shill or anything. I just really like them. They're solidly built. This is a VB Tech Blunt, or the VB line, I think. But the interesting thing about the Type 14 is that this is, probably one of the earlier examples we have of an arming sword, right? Or a kind of a one-handed cruciform sword. You might also hear them referred to as short swords, time and time again. What's interesting about this is the overall length. I think from crossguard to tip, I think it's only like 28 inches. It's actually fairly short, but it is very wide. So for those of you who like lots of bind presence, right? You like the chunky boys for the bind presence. The Type 14 is pretty great. As we get kind of later on into the later centuries, we start to see swords start to get longer and a little narrower. This is a Type 16, also from VB, also from Purple Heart. I don't know if you can see the little guy on the thing there, but this is also a very common style used in Sword and Buckler as well. And I think you'll see more Type 16 style swords than you might see the Type 14s. Again, the Type 14s are they're awful short, and probably put you at a bit of a disadvantage when you are fencing in earnest. Yes. Oh, and thanks, Joe. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about also is the kind of the I was going to say kind of the knock-on effects of Sword and Buckler fencing. But what's interesting is that, as Joe has pointed out, right, there's the Bolognese fencing, which is, I think, mostly side sword, right? And again, that comes from, unless this is like Bolognese, like actual sword and buckler, like short sword, arming sword stuff. Again, this is where my understanding of the material starts to kind of taper off, right? But as I understand it, right, the style of fencing that we're talking about here, yeah, side sword from 16th, yeah, exactly. And this is actually, we start to see some of the contemporary crossover here with the Lignitzer and the Lecoqner and Talhofer stuff. I mean, it's a little early, right? It's like 15th century, and we start to move a little forward that way. But obviously, we do see it start to transition in a meaningful way from the early 14th century with 133 to the side sword and onto like rapier and dagger, rapier and buckler, rotella. Some of the more interesting exotic stuff like rapier and cloak and cases of rapiers and stuff like that. So the style of fighting that we're talking about is pretty ubiquitous, over the centuries that we're primarily concerned with in HEMA. And the other thing that is unique about the 133 effect book is that it's really one of the only contemporary sources that we have for sword and shield fighting. There are later sources, right? There, your Talhofers, your Lignitzers, etc. And also with I don't know how many Italian sources talk about like buckler and rotella and fun stuff like that. But as you get later, obviously there's more to be had in that area. But in this time period, we're talking about the early 14th century. This is a time when you'll see shields like kite shields or heater style shields commonly depicted. And as I've kind of poked around, one of the things that kind of drew me to this is that I always, when I was a kid, I had kind of this idea in my head of, of sort of knightly combat, which included a sword and a shield, which I understand that comes from a lot of, I don't know if you know this about me. You might not, but if you do, this will come as no surprise. I've consumed a lot of fantasy material throughout the years, and so I always thought that that's just kind of how it was. And so it's interesting to find that there is next to nothing for sort of the larger shield types, right? The heater shields and the kite shield, etc. This is also pretty interesting about stuff like you see people talking about fighting with like Dane axes and Viking shields and Viking style swords and shields. We really don't have any information for that either. A lot of that is reconstructed, and a lot of it we can base it on is stuff like 133, the stuff that we have. So like I said, it's a really interesting style of fencing. It plays a lot more with thrusts and angles and slices more than I would have expected it. Again, when I think of a sword and a shield, I'm often thinking of of big sweeping cuts that are being blocked with a shield, but oftentimes it's really not that, right? In the in the spirit of more show and tell, I also have a buckler, right? This is actually quite large for a buckler. I think that contemporary bucklers are actually a little smaller than this, but as you can see, it's got metal boss. I think the shield itself is wood. It's covered in, I think, burlap or canvas, and then edged with rawhide. This particular shield, again, I feel like I'm on QVC right now, like the Home Shopping Network. I'm like, and if you act right now, we've only got 20 of these left, right? Go to, I think I got this from South Coast Swords, I think, RJ's group down there. And it's also, pretty easy to get stuff through them. They also have some pretty quality other gear as well. I think they're one of the only outlets that do black fencer gear in the U.S., which is often very prized and sought after. So if you're into black fencer stuff, that is a black fencer buckler, and I highly recommend it. It's pretty great. Some of the other things you might think about if you are looking to get into sword and buckler, or if you're looking to study it more and more. There are many books about it. This particular one is called The Book of the Buckler, and it literally is just a book of bucklers. Their history, their use, there are lots of pretty pictures inside, which I like because I don't read very well. But they've also got, museum examples. If you're looking to make your own, this is a great resource. I was thinking about making my own until I realized that I just couldn't wait, and I wanted to have a buckler right the hell now. So I just got online and got mine. But if you are looking to make your own, they can be made for a pretty reasonably amount of time and materials. If you know Dave Kalinowski, he's got a pretty good handle on. Yes, thank you, James. Yes, South Coast Swords is the U.S. distributor for Black. Thank you for validating that. That's what I had figured, but obviously we want to make sure.
John,
Dave
I think John made his buckler as well.
I think you did too. John, are you here? Are you with?
Yeah,
you are with us?
I made one, and it's so cool. And it looks a lot like the one you held up, except for mine's got some painting on it. But yeah, that South Coast one looks great.
And it is pretty neat. I think I want to paint mine too at some point. I didn't want to start painting my gear until I got a buckler, and I was like, this needs to be painted. But yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is like, you just get like some good impact grade wood and like a metal boss. I think Dave was saying that you could get like a dog bowl from like the Lowe's or something, yeah, or Target or whatever, and use that as a boss, which is, as far as materials go, it's pretty great. If you look at like actual steel bosses online for building your own like Viking shields and things like that, they get pretty pricey pretty quick. So whatever you can do to kind of keep costs down, I think, especially in these uncertain times, right, when we don't always have access to friends who can help us out with things like that. It's always good to have in your back pocket. What else can I show you guys? Let's see here. We talked about 133. We talked about the Book of the Buckler, which is awesome. The other resource I would highly recommend, and this might be somewhat controversial, so if you want to engage in controversy, now is a great time to do it. Here is a DVD by a guy named Roland Varzeka. You may remember him from the Dimicator channel on YouTube. Recently, I think there was some fuss, not recently, this might have been the last couple of years, right, about some of the more, how should we put this diplomatically, conjectural ideas of Roland and company, especially regarding how people walked in the Middle Ages. Kind of interesting. Yeah, it's a little silly, but Roland has actually done a lot of really great work with Sword and Buckler and with 133 especially. This particular DVD, it's only, it's not long. It's like 90 minutes. Yes, the walking is very silly, but we don't like Roland for his walking videos. We like him for Sword and Buckler. This is a great resource. This was recommended to me, and actually Roland as a resource was recommended to me by none other than Jake Norwood, who is very much kind of a proponent of Roland's techniques and his scholastic pursuits as well. Let's see, the other person I would get after for information about this, who has kind of a big presence in the HEMA community, is Dave Rawlings as well. Dave Rawlings has got a lot of YouTube videos up. You kind of have to dig a little bit to find some of the good meaty, Sword and Buckler stuff, but it's out there. And he's great fun to listen to, right? Not just for the accent, but also because he's able to present information in a way that's very cogent and easy to follow. So that is again another great resource for that. I've been rambling for the better part of 20 minutes now. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and open up the floor. And if anybody has any insights, information, resources that they like, that they want to share, I encourage you to go ahead and do so.
Dave, which was the I-33 book that you mentioned at the start? Was it Wagner and Hand?
No, although as I understand it, Stephen Hand is also a pretty great resource as well. This is, again, I'll hold it up here. This is the Medieval Art of Swordsmanship. This is the Jeffrey Forgang translation.
Okay, yeah, I've got the medieval sword and shield, the combat system of Royal Armory's MS I-33, Paul Wagner and Stephen Hand. I've yet to read it, but I've got it.
Okay.
And lots and lots of photos in that one, which, of course, they're wearing goofy-looking monks' robes, but, you know.
Well, naturally, right? You can't have HEMA without some of the more fun fashion aspects.
All the better to move in.
Right,
Let's face it.
exactly. I mean, let's be honest, right?
It's like us Scotsmen in our kilts.
Yeah.
The sheep can't hear the zippers.
If you say so, James. Yeah, if you take a look, if you get a chance to look at any of the plates from especially 133, you'll see that depicted there. And actually, this was something that I was gonna talk about earlier, also, and totally spaced on. But so in the fact book here, we have a depiction of two opponents, two fighters, right? A student and a teacher. I think it's in the translation, it translates to like student and priest, and they are, they're going through the plays of 133. In the very back, and like the last like couple of plates, we see one of the earliest, and I think, don't quote me on this, and if anybody knows this, please jump in and correct me, but I think this might be one of the only depictions we have of women in a fecht book ever, like at all. And this is actually where the why it's also known as the Wall Purges fecht book is because the figure there colloquially is attributed to be a depiction of Saint Walpurga. So there is some I wouldn't say controversy, but maybe some argument about who it is supposed to depict, whether or not it's one of the artist's like girlfriend or something. Like literally, like that might be like his lover or something. But it's also very interesting in that she is included. It's one of the other interesting things about it. It's all very interesting, but we know that this particular fecht book had several different authors and illustrators over the years. This was not something that was done all in one shot. It was there were definitely some. Yes, thank you, James. That is perfect. Yeah, you can see there the depiction of the student and priest with the sword and buckler. Perspective being what it was, right? You might notice that some of the hand placement and like the way the swords and the shields kind of overlap is a little confusing, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to follow. Actually, I take that back. 133 is actually one of the more difficult treatises to kind of get into, and certainly this is probably not the one you want to pick up to start learning about sword and buckler if you're going to be fencing it in earnest, which was a bit of a shock to me to find out. 133 is a little more. It's a little denser, right? It's a little hard to kind of start sussing things out. If you're pairing that with another resource, with some of Roland's work or Dave Rawlings' work, then I think it becomes a little easier to parse. But for the most part, if you're trying to go into it on your own, unless you have a book like James has with some it looks like, James, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like some of those, books that Stephen Hand are involved with tend to be very, they don't spare the descriptions, and some of the translations are expanded on, right?
Like I said, I haven't actually read it yet, so I don't know. But and as I also said, there's a zillion pictures in here. Let me bring up just a 2-page sample that I just flipped to random here. I'll give you an idea of what they're doing picture-wise.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because when we look at something similar, when we look at the manuscript itself, if I can do this and have you see what I'm looking at, and also talking to the microphone. But you can see the plates, and then over here it's also got this is an honest to God translation, right? It has the Latin/German and the English, and then there are some notes that are added by by Jeffrey Forgang. But for the most part, he doesn't really give you a lot of context, right? It really is just it's a pure translation, right? It's not. It's certainly something you
More
could
like
work.
the Ballerstein.
Yeah, right. It's not something that you could that has like somebody's idea of how it all works, right? And that can be actually a pretty big plus, right? You don't have to worry about reinventing the wheel or going against someone else's interpretation of some of this stuff. You can kind of go through it on your own and just kind of have your own understanding of it. Again, if you're looking to get more of a I put this. If you're trying to get a deeper understanding to apply it in honest to God, pressure tested fencing environments, I think it would also really be a good idea to couple this with, guys like Roland or Dave Rawlings, or even folks in the club who might have some understanding of sword and buckler fencing. Again, there I go, rambling again. I think that's kind of the end of my spiel here. Does anybody have any questions about any of the sources or any of the equipment or anything at all?
Hey, Dave, I'd like to share my buckler real quick.
Yeah.
Do my show and tell.
Hell yeah.
My camera on just in
Do it
one
up, Jack.
second here.
Do it up, John.
Try to get going. But it's very similar to the one you've got. I do want to say though, I think I built this thing for less than $50. The Boss I actually got off Amazon for 24. I think it was actually cheaper then, but when I look on Amazon now, it's shown as 24. The wood is like, it's a big sheet of plywood, but when you factor in how much I'm actually using, it's maybe $10 of wood. And then around the edge here, this is a leather blank. It's a belt blank you get from Michael's or anyplace else. Just it's a belt, and that is what's gone around the side. And then besides that, the nails. This is a great technique that Chris Streichler showed me how to make your own rivets. They're just nails pounded through and then pounded on the other side, just pounded flat with the ball peen hammer. But my point being, this was about, it was a bit of time, not a lot of time, but it was about $50 material, less than $50. But the big thing I want to stress is South Coast did a great job of putting leather on the side, because that leather absolutely stops blows. It's kind of hard to see, but scratch my finger here. This cut in the leather was from somebody that got really zesty with one of their hues, and the look on their face when their sword just stopped was classic. And this is what really makes me think that a lot of these bucklers probably were leather lined, and that will have an impact on how you fight, because if you thrust, the leather on the edge is going to catch it, and if you cut, yeah, you might cut the leather, but it's going to stop. By comparison, you see some of the plastic ones that are out there, and you see some of the metal ones, they just bounce right off. But it's amazing to watch somebody just go, oh my God, my sword stopped mid-stroke. And you're not quite catching the weapon. I'm sure if they were using a sharp weapon, it probably would actually cut in and you would catch your weapon. But I think that right there, in my book, illustrates why some of the things you said are very true about how it's not a hewing sport. We do that because we like to swing hard and hit hard. But I really think the folks that were doing this kind of stuff weren't doing that because somebody could show up to the game with this, and if you cut with zest and you really cut it at a guy, you're going to get stuck. If you're lucky, you did not get stuck, but you're going to get stopped. If you're very lucky, you would maybe glance and you would not get stuck or stopped. But if you were unlucky, you would get stuck or stopped, and then you're at that person's mercy. So really cool to see the one you've got has got that rawhide edge, because that's it's a different dynamic in the fight. And I'd recommend, if anybody is going to make one or buy one, look for that rawhide, or put it on yourself, because it changes the dynamics. Let me stop there.
No,
John,
great.
what do you do for the handhold and the cutout in the back so that you can actually fit your hand in there? Okay, you just cut a circle, and then what'd you do for the grip? Just
Did you lathe that, or how did the grip come about?
You're muted, John.
Button. There it is. So real quick, to the first question, yeah, this is just 2 circles cut into a donut with a circle in the middle. The other key thing too, if you are going to make your own, is when you take your plywood, and there is archaeological proof that the Romans had plywood. So plywood is not a new construct. It's made with new materials, but it's still been around for a while. But if you are making one of these things, make sure you take your 2 pieces of wood that you use and offset the grains perpendicular to each other, so that you take your one circle, you turn the other circle 90 degrees, and then you glue them together, because that will strengthen the overall wood. But back to the middle part here, this is just, it was just a piece of wood that I whittled down with a belt grinder and some good old whittling, and just got it to shape. What I will say though is I did make a mistake. Do not make the shape so that it's ovalized flat relative to the plane of the buckler, because then when you hold it, you're holding an ovalized thing that is going into your knuckles and into your thumb. You want to actually have it be oriented going this way in, so that it's like a sword grip, because generally you're holding your buckler straight forward like this. So if you are making your own, or you're looking at the grip of your buckler, look for one that's got the grip oriented more like a sword blade, so that it is deeper this way and shallower this way.
Is yours like that, Dave?
That's a good question, because
that's a good question.
I have a design flaw on mine.
The way this one came is actually, it's just like a big dowel in the middle. But it acts kind of in the way that you're talking about, John, where as you're gripping it, it's a more natural kind of grip, right? It doesn't, your hand isn't forced into that position, which is great, because as you work through some of these plays, right, the shield is going to do some, it's going to ask some things of you that you might not be terribly comfortable with. But it is always a great idea to know kind of where your wrist and arm alignment is, and having that, again, having that oriented in this way. I'm not crazy about this grip, to be honest with you, because it's pretty chunky. So if I had my druthers, I would probably whittle it down too. But as you're suggesting, John, I probably wouldn't go from this side. I might go in here just to kind of give my hand a little, which is not, I mean, I don't have small hands, right? But they're certainly not, I feel like I would have some real issues hanging onto this if I didn't kind of take some of it out.
I have small hands, I totally feel you. So it looks like that can be disassembled, or can you get the grip off there?
I don't think so. Everything is hammered and peened in pretty well.
Okay.
The rivets themselves, you'd have to, these are all peened. Yeah. So I might have to get it.
It'd be worth it. I think it'd be worth it, just maybe grind those peens off and then reinstall it. Put a better grip on there if you were not happy with it.
Yeah, I don't know.
A little bit of work, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it works. It might be that once I start fencing in earnest with this, that it might be okay. I will say, and actually, John, maybe you can kind of help me out with this. How much does your buckler weigh?
Less than a feather, but it's not that light. I do not get tired, but it definitely.
Like 3.5 to 4, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to weigh. The problem is because a feather only weighs 2.5 pounds, but that weight is like way away from your hand. I'll put this on the scale, but good question.
Just kind of as an interesting kind of aside.
Yeah,
it's less than 5 for sure.
Oh yeah, it's not 5.
Yeah. Oh, well, weight does tend to play a bit of a factor, right? Confession time. I got really excited about buying a buckler when I got really excited about sword and buckler fencing, and I just bought one sight unseen, a steel buckler from Purple Heart. Turns out I got like the largest buckler they could provide me, and that thing weighs like 8 pounds. Like, not really. I mean, it might be like 4, but it's heavy. And if your arm is straight out the way that a lot of these plays are depicted, that is a lot of weight to be holding for a period of time, and your arm gets tired real quick. So yeah, I'm curious. I was curious about that just because I feel like if I were to grind down the handle on my buckler, I could probably lose a little bit of the weight also. And I think that might be not such a bad idea.
It's interesting that dynamic exists even with the bucklers, because that's exactly how and I'm sure Will can confirm this, that's how people approach their harness. They're like, oh, if I take out this row of, rivets that aren't doing anything, I can shave off, 4 ounces or whatever it is, but it adds up at the end of the day.
I guess Will doesn't want to confirm. That's fine. You live your life, Will. Do what you want. But yeah, that is kind of a concern, right? Trying to shave off what is it? I used to say in when I was a Boy Scout, we'd go on long hikes. They'd say at the end of a hike, an ounce is a pound. So you feel the weight even in small increments, and so yeah,
Ounces
not
are
having
pounds and pounds kill. The
yeah.
military phrase, because you wind up carrying 80 pounds. So ounces are pounds and pounds kill.
Yeah. They probably didn't say the pounds killed to the children because,
Oh,
yikes. No. Yeah, don't put too much in your packs, kid, or else you die. Yeah, yikes. But yeah, that thanks for showing that off, John. That's really cool, and it's also really neat that you built that. I have you fenced with it in a tournament yet?
Yeah, that's where that cut came from. Yeah, I didn't do amazing, but the stuff I learned from the tournament and what I learned, how the gear behaves, and a lot of people show up with a lot of different bucklers, and you see a lot of different things in action. And watching how the rawhide edge performed and reading some of the sources, it really makes sense that as difficult as it is to make it, that rawhide or something like that on the edge is the way to go, because it has so many tiny little functions, and every little thing definitely adds up. Just the same as any sport.
I was gonna say, as we were talking about it, there I did find a couple of examples in this very handy book of the buckler that do depict. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but they do have a leather edge around the rim here. So not only effective, but also historical, which we all enjoy. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
The tendency in the sport is producers want to make things that people will be happy with and won't break quickly. And it is easier to crank out a solid metal disc or those plastic ones and sell that, and it will never break, but it will not actually be performing the way that you should in a fight, in my book. I'm glad to see the one that, if they're making those en masse, that's good to see that somebody's making those things, because that should be a norm. Yeah,
I get the impression that the steel buckler I have is in that former category where it was, it's not, I wouldn't say it's over engineered, but it's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? It's got some serious weight and heft and sturdiness to it. Again, the trade-off here. Also, it is it's faced with leather. It's not rimmed, it doesn't have the leather around the rim, but it does have the leather face, which also adds a little bit of weight to it as well. Even without the leather on it, though, this thing is pretty hefty, and I would not want to fence with it for really any length of time. I might use it as a conditioning tool, but yeah, for any serious fencing, I would probably not want to have something that big and heavy. Cool. Well, anybody else want to jump in? Any questions, comments, unsolicited testimonials?
Care about staying historically accurate on there. The cheap and easy way to do stuff is take garden hose and nail that around the edge, and it's going to give you a nice little something that things aren't going to bounce off of, and it's really easy to shape on there, because it's already a cylinder. Once you cut it down the middle, it'll just fit over there.
That makes sense.
Yet, but
I've heard some folks using the pipe insulation, sort of the foam, that it's pretty tough and durable. It will chew up pretty quickly, but it's lightweight is one good thing, and it'll definitely stop your opponent's weapon. But you definitely say yeah, but it's not accurate. It's just okay, yeah, you're sort of making leather and it's sort of there and it's got the same effect, but you're using foam. I mean, come on.
I think we make a lot of concessions to historical accuracy in the name of safety and ease of use and readiness of resources too. if anybody's looking to get started with sword and buckler fencing, one of the more common things you might see people using is actually, you might not see them in tournaments or anything, but to get a feel for how sword and buckler fencing works, a lot of folks turn to the cold steel plastic buckler. Those things, yeah, and they can be had for pretty cheap. I want to say they're like 20, 25 bucks. Like they are pretty cheap. Again, like John was saying, you can make yours. He's, I think, 50 bucks, less than 50 bucks is what he said. The buckler I've got, you can purchase from South Coast for like 80, I think it was like 80 bucks with shipping. So not inexpensive. There's certainly more cost-effective ways to get into it. And Purple Heart also, as I understand it, they also sell like the Penty trainers, but for an arming sword size. So if again, if cost is an issue and you just want to start to kind of look at that as an option, it's a pretty cost-effective way to start. Those plastic bucklers will get chewed up pretty quick though, especially with steel swords.
Yeah.
So
is it worthwhile to invest in a dedicated side sword or short sword?
I think so. But that's my philosophy.
As opposed to just like using a messer as a backup.
Well, and this is where that's a really great question, Marlene. I would say
answer honestly, it's okay.
It depends, right? If you, I think if you're looking to fence seriously with sword and buckler, a lot of the tournament weapons are going to ask that you have like a cruciform arming sword. That said, some of the resources that you might turn to and find, especially some of the later sources that we see, i.e. Talhofer, Lecoqner, etc., don't necessarily depict, and I want to say that I've seen depictions of sword and buckler fencing that incorporate a messer, or might have been like a falchion or something. Some of the sword and buckler fencing does start to kind of have a bit crossover with the longest messer stuff as well as we get later on into the centuries. So your mileage may vary. I really like the look and feel of the arming sword, and it does kind of help me keep sort of that historical era in mind as I'm fencing with them. And it feels, it's actually it's the reverse of the logical extension of a longsword, right? The cruciform longswords that we're all pretty familiar with, especially the VB line that I have. I've got a VB longsword as well, and so moving from that longsword style to the short swords was pretty easy. They're balanced pretty well. They're weighted pretty well. They've got some good flex, right? So if I were to ever to fence in a tournament with them, I'd probably be pretty good to go. Another thought that I just had also is that a lot of the plays that you will find in 133 are done with both the short and long edge. So there you go right there. I mean, having a weapon with two edges instead of just one is going to allow you some greater flexibility tactically as well. But yeah, good question, Marlene. That's
interesting that the later sources show what looks to be a messer or falchion with it.
Yeah.
Do we see the double-edged work there too?
That's a good question. I think with when we start to get because Lecoqner is one of those sources that we turn to for messer fencing. Yep. It's kind of
like
one
this big.
Yeah, it's one of the more ubiquitous ones, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the plays that we see there are maybe not extensions of, but are what's the word I'm thinking of here? Maybe like adjacent to some of the stuff we see with a double-edged sword. Some of the plays, you couldn't do all of the plays in 133 with a messer or falchion, something with a single edge, right? So in that regard, there are some interesting overlaps with longsword fencing as well. We can't just say that sword and buckler fencing turns into messer fencing, turns into rapier fencing, right? There's obviously that transition is not terribly linear. And we do see some of the stuff in sword and buckler find its way into longsword and vice versa. But definitely having a true and false edge, right, long and short edge, also will be one of those things.
One thing I would mention, having used a messer for sword and buckler fighting for at least a little bit, the biggest issue I ran into was not actually the nagel or the edge; it was the grip. Now I've got one of those comfort fencing things, and the grip on that's really, really small. But when you have the big glove on, it's nice to be able to have the pommel on the other side, so it locks in place a bit better. It's perfectly functional for like going through the motions, but it's actually the longer grip and not having that stability with the pommel that I've run into the most problems with.
That's interesting. I'm curious also, since we do see, and again, this is where my expertise starts to kind of drop off, right? My familiarity with the system, but there are times when you're handling an arming sword, right? As we're often handling like a long sword, right? We've got kind of this nice handshake grip that we have. There might be times when you want to strike with, a sort of thumb grip, right? And I, not having a messer myself, I'd be curious to know kind of how the grip transitions also work, with the grips being as narrow as they are. I don't know if you can shed any light on that, Joe.
The grip transition is definitely trickier, less because of the shape of the grip, I think, and more just, well, as compared to longsword, it's easy to go into thumb grip and now because you have that backhand to support it, it's a lot easier to go loose on it. Mm-hmm. I sort of do the basic thing Jake taught us, which is kind of that in between, not quite handshake, not quite thumb grip on the messer. Can't do that in gloves, obviously, but so the transitions definitely take some getting used to. As somebody who doesn't own an arming sword, I can't comment on how much that would translate the other way. So it's kind of both on opposite sides here, I'm afraid.
Somebody out there has got to have both. And if you do, speak up or I will find you.
Yeah, my use of a buckler has been with a basket hilt. So very different. It's still a double-edged sword, but it's not something that allows a thumb grip in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, when you look at some of the historical Scottish stuff, you've got the targe, which does have which is more like a traditional shield in that it's got the strap over the forearm and then the hand grip toward the end, but it's still relatively small. But then you also see some really small stuff that presumably are bucklers in there. But I'm kind of a basket hilt person, given that I've got 9 of them from the late 1600s to the early 1900s. So
very cool. Well, okay. I mean, let's touch on that a little bit too, because obviously, when we look at later fencing, right, and we look at stuff like basket hilted broadswords and targes and stuff, one would assume that there might be some overlap there, and I'd venture to guess that there probably would be. Although, and James, correct me if I'm wrong here, but as you've handled broadswords, as I understand it, the style of fencing is a little more akin to military saber, and kind of coming off like the small sword and spadroon sort of schools of fencing, which is again not a knock against it. Obviously, those swords are pretty beefy, and I think they're made for that kind of thing.
Well, it's not coming from the saber so much as saber more developed from that, because these are from the spadroon, yes, which I'm guessing is coming, and the Schiavona, the Italian Schiavona, is basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do see kind of a direct sort of transitionary lineage there. And yeah, you're right. We see more of the saber coming from basket hilted broadswords than the other way around. You're absolutely right. What was I going to add there? Oh, just that what's interesting to me is that as we examine that, right, as we look at broadswords and sort of the transition from thrusting to cutting that we see, especially in military swords of that time. What has been really interesting to me is the idea that as I kind of touched on earlier, the idea that you are you're making more thrusts and slices and like press cuts and things like that with a sort of with 14th century sword and buckler than you are honest to God Hughes. Obviously Hughes exist, right? They exist in 133 and they exist in the later plays as well, the later sources. But what interested me also was that it is a lot more akin to binding and winding and thrusting with a long sword than cutting with one, which was pretty interesting. I would really, I cannot recommend this DVD enough. It's called Sword and Shield: Basic Principles and Technique of Medieval Buckler Combat. Again, it's if you look for, like, if you Google Roland Varzeka, Warzecha, and Sword and Buckler DVD. This I think I had to order it from like a site in like Europe or something. I don't know if they make them in the US or not, but like I said, it's like 90 minutes, right? He goes over some of the basic body mechanics, the more basic fundamental motions, and then spends a pretty fair amount of time devoted to some of the plays. And again, a lot more, blade placement, making sure that your like the strong of your blade is correctly positioned, and also that you are this might go without saying, but when you're using your buckler, that you're covering correctly. I think, from my perspective, when I started approaching this, I was thinking that it would be like you're always displacing the opponent's sword with your buckler, and then you're making your own attack, and that is not always true, right? Sometimes we're displacing their sword with your sword, and you're positioning your buckler such that you're creating a safe position for yourself to engage in, which is pretty interesting. As a sport fencer from way back in the day, I would say that I found more in common with something like modern épée fencing than with longsword fencing in that regard, which was really interesting. It was something I wasn't expecting, but I was very kind of pleased to see that these fundamental motions that we should always be training with. And thank you, Marlene, for posting that. If you look in the chat, Marlene posted a link to the the DVD, right?
Yeah, the books are higher up in the chat, but yes.
Oh, hell yeah. But where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So some of the more fundamental techniques that we are familiar with longsword fencing, for example, things like again with blade displacement and things like that, but also controlling the center line, for example, is also really important. Offside stepping, right? So stepping obliquely to your opponent's center line in order to control their center line and more efficiently deliver a strike is also really prevalent as well. It isn't as obvious as you might think when you're going through a manuscript like 133. How much like physical body positioning goes into making sure some of these plays actually work. But it is a really fascinating and I can't overstate how deep you could plumb the depths of the style of fencing. There's a lot to get lost in here, a lot to chew on.
Do you find the body positioning? Oh, sorry. Michael says, what did you use? Oh, he's talking to John. JK.
I was talking to John. I do have a question for you, Dave.
Yeah, what's up, Michael?
Hey, how's it going?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Pretty good, man.
Good.
I know you're talking about like the grip for the arming sword, but I was kind of I have a buckler. It's a cold steel, but I've been kind of working around like what the grip of that feels like. Like, how do you grip the buckler itself?
So there's a I wouldn't venture to say that there's like a universal grip, but a lot of the things that you will need to do, right, as you're holding the buckler, you'll need to make sure that the buckler is positioned to cover no matter what you're doing. This might be a little hard with as I'm seated, but when you're fencing, right, there and in 133 there are 7 primary guards or wards in 133 that all have your hand and arm in different places. Let's see, for something like the 7th ward is Long Point, like Longanort, which is pretty familiar to us. Let me see if I can do it this way so you guys can see. But obviously we've got the sword and the buckler out right in front of us. You might not be able to see the angle with the camera here, but the buckler is actually angled slightly toward my opponent, right? It's not full on, and it's also not completely to the side, right? So it's creating an opening for them, right? It's sort of at like a 45, and my hand is just supporting that essentially, right? I will say one of the nice things about this grip is that it is round. So if I need to adjust the grip in my hand, right, I don't have to put a lot of torque on my wrist to do it. At the same time, I might prefer something maybe, like I said, a little less chunky, because I could see, especially with a glove, you couldn't fit a heavy glove in this.
Yeah, I was wondering like what the protection would be necessary. Like if you're like really going at it, if you had a buckler there, would you need a spec heavy in the buckler hand? Or
that's a good question. Your fingers would probably be okay. The back of your hand and thumb, like if a blade came in here, it could do some real damage. But again, you could try, but I've tried. I've got a pair of spec heavies and also a pair of sparring gloves, the mittens, and I can't get either into the opening on this thing.
I found with the cold steel, the coning could kind of fit in there.
Oh, that's right, Joe. That might be interesting. I'm gonna have to try that also.
So, hey guys, hey Dave. A lot of us use it's the, I figure it makes the thing. I'll try to dig it in my bag in a second here, but it's essentially the really heavy rapier glove that's got the really thick padding on top of the knuckles and top of the fingers and all around
Purple
the wrist.
Heart has them.
Yeah, it's Purple Hearts, I think. I just can't remember the actual which one it is, but it's not the one that's like, just stitched. It's actually got really chunky material. That said, though, your forearm past your wrist is a choice target area. So you still want to have something that's Kydex-y underneath that glove. Generally, your fingers and your knuckles are pretty safe unless you just really biff where you have your shield when the blow comes in. Most shots that come in that suck are the ones that hit the wrist or the forearm. But yeah, generally, like you said, a spez. Yeah, there's a way I cannot get my full-on spez, big old clamshell inside of my glove. That's impossible. The only one I've been able to fit is the Purple Heart one. I'll try to grab my bag from a second here just to show you, but I've seen that's one of the more common gloves I've seen out there. I would recommend at least that if you're doing full-on sword and buckler, if you're going at it.
Now, John, this might be apparent when you pull it out of your bag, but is there a gap in between like the knuckle protection and the?
Yeah, give me a second. I'm gonna go grab it. I'll be back in a moment.
I mean, one way around that is if you're building it yourself, if you set the handle a little bit farther back with an offset so that you've got more space, so that it's not flush up against the plane of the back of the buckler itself.
Yeah, James, you're absolutely right. With some of the steel bucklers that you'll find out there, and I think, and Michael, you might be able to attest to this with the cold steel as well. Those even as this is right, the handles are offset a little bit, set away from the from the shield itself to give a little more room. As I understand it, the cold seals are also kind of like they're a little too like kind of like the tops of the grip are like a little too chunky. It's hard to like fit your thumb over. That's what I've heard. I haven't really used them, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, let me go
Like
grab
once
it
there's
real
like
quick.
if I'm remembering correctly, like where they have the handle attached, there's like a nut or something there. So like that's what your thumb would be resting on.
Yeah, that doesn't feel very comfortable.
Dave, I don't know if you guys can see me, but so this is not what I'm talking about. These are the common ones that you see for a lot of rapier users. This is way too thin for practice, sure thing.
I linked the poofy ones in the chat if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, this guy right here, this got relatively good size. It's almost like a motorcycle glove. This is not entirely adequate for your wrist. If you take a full-on shot from something like Carboli or something like him, you're gonna have a bad day. So generally, anytime I'm doing sword buckler, I've got my jacket, which also has, our Kydex, just like we were talking past couple weeks, like Kydex protection right about to here. That's going inside this thing. And once I'm holding my shield, Lord, I lost my shield, dude. I had it here somewhere. Put it down. Well, oh, here it is. But yeah, let me try to get the camera view. So from front, from side, so you can see that somebody coming in perpendicular to me can get me in a very bad spot. That's a bad day. But generally, as long as I don't really just biff my protection, I will eat shots here. I've eaten a shot once or twice here. I have gotten something on the thumb or the fingers on rare occasion, but generally it's been so glancing because it had to go through traffic like my sword or something like that. So I feel pretty safe with this, but that said, protect your hands. I could not stress that enough with sword and buckler.
It's good life advice.
Yeah, your wrist is definitely a prime target for your opponent, but yeah, do not be out there really flashing the inside of your. If you're showing the inside of your buckler, you've really screwed up something badly. Just keep something like Dave was saying, an angle that is, a good flat. Hey, whole camera's covered at an angle, but definitely if they can see the inside of your buckler, you've got a bad moment coming your way. Because that's just could be awful.
I want to say Carl uses his Konings when he uses.
Yeah, he does. When those came out, and I know he also uses these too. I've seen quite a few folks use something like this. The Konings are, I'd say, yeah, definitely they're better than these, but they are a higher profile, and I have enough space here that I can get my fingers in there, and that lets me manipulate my shield around pretty easily. But as you create traffic inside your boss, you're losing your capacity to manipulate. And manipulation is a pretty key factor here with your buckler.
I wonder how the Red Dragons would do. I don't have them, so I'm not sure.
They're short, so that's just like the little cross glove. They're not going very high up past the wrist, and you'll see people use Red Dragons with sword and buckler. They just, they protect your fingers, but they're not protecting your wrist or your lower forearm. So these are cheaper, if I'm not mistaken, than a Red Dragon. I would recommend.
It's literally half the price.
Yeah, I would recommend that. Red Dragons are great for just beginning HEMA, but I would.
There he is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that fits in there.
Right. But that's the cold steel, and that has a very big boss well compared to my boss, for example. Those things are actually very massive.
Yeah, it's not offset too much. It's just that the actual, like you said, the well is very deep.
Yeah, it's got a big old bowl.
Yeah, this thing is probably maybe 6 or 7 inches. I without getting my Koenigs, I would venture to guess that I would have a real hard time stuffing them in there. And once they were in there, man, I don't think I could move that buckler around with any real degree of finesse. It would be a ham-fisted affair, that's for sure. But then that's Koenigs, I think. I don't know. That's a lot of heavy gloves these days.
That they're you can't really find Koenigs now, right?
I don't know where to look for them.
Yeah.
I've seen them on Purple Heart, but I don't know if they're still making them.
Just go pro gauntlet. I'm sure that'll fit inside of a buckler.
Yeah, probably.
Come on, just do it. Just do it.
Just be able to go like
Just
this
hand
inside
fits
the
it.
buckler.
That's right. Neat.
So I really like. You probably
only
can't see
got
it
a
too
couple
well.
of
This
those.
is the Armin sword I've been using. It's from Arms and Armor. It's like a little bit pricier than the other ones, but it does have really good handling and like pretty good flex. So even if you
Oh,
hit
nice.
somebody with
Yeah,
it,
those are sweet.
it doesn't mess them up too much. Yeah,
Is yours tipped, Michael? Just out of curiosity.
it's like that.
Oh,
Spatula?
okay. So you got a spatulated tip.
Yeah, not rolled or anything.
Yeah. Just as a point of clarification, these are rolled tips as well, which I know some people don't really care for. And I've heard some horror stories about rolled tips taking chunks out of people's flesh.
That's why you tip them.
That's why you tip them. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'll tip it once I get.
I
Point.
mean, the spatulated tip, right? It's less of an issue, but yeah, if you are using something with a rolled tip, it might be good.
Yeah, as far as bucklers go, I've just got a couple of the 12-inch metal ones. One of the things I did to one of them, though, just to play with the idea that spike, sticking out of the center of the boss, is I drilled a small hole in there and I took a one of those spiral metal door stops, the springy ones. And so that gave me about a 2.5, 3-inch spike on there, which worked actually reasonably well, because when you punch somebody with it, as long as you've got a little bit of an angle there, it's going to flex and bend.
Yeah.
Until it caught a blade, and then it just kind of twisted, and now it's just bent over. So what I've been projects, along with making bucklers out of plywood and so forth, with the 2 or 3 steel bosses that I have, is to build a sleeve out of canvas for that and put that over that, so that when it does get hit, there's enough, it'll still flex because it's not firm, but there's enough there to keep a blade from going in between those, the spring, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you all know how that works out once I get around to it. But I started that project about 2.5 years ago and haven't done anything more. So
Very cool.
It's a good
Yeah.
idea. Maybe what do you think about maybe taking a finger off of a leather glove, like a really thick leather glove, like a welding glove, and festooning that on there?
yeah, that's the other thing I thought of, and I've got some old leather work gloves from that I could probably do that with. That would work and save me sewing up canvas to the right size. I'll have to try that. Let me run down to my basement and see if I can even find that.
A really good idea. Like the idea of the door jamb. We were talking about doing targes like that too. And this is sort of going tangential, but coming back to this, there's a group called it's like Bayonet Trainers. They mess around with very early 1900s bayonet trainers that are just like spring operated doodads. And there's a lot of concepts out there about how you would put a spike on a thing that could be a spike, but would be safe. Just like, like the fake knives you jab at a person and doesn't actually stab them. It's spring loaded. But
Yeah,
there is definitely some merit to those ideas.
That's pretty cool. And as we've discussed, historical. I can't overstate what a great resource this Book of the Buckler is. If you're looking to make your own buckler, it's got some really great ideas, but just kind of like how we have like the oak shot typology for swords. It also has something similar for bucklers as well, right?
Oh, wow.
And it depicts like all kinds of. We've got bucklers made out of steel with spikes in the boss. There's those like those wacky like later. They look like sun chips to me. These guys right here.
Oh yeah, the wavy boys.
The wavy boys, yeah.
Those are really tough to fight against. Some folks have those today, and they be careful when you face one of those. That guy shows with that, he probably knows what he's doing, and watch out for those things in action. They are a headache.
Yikes. What do you think is kind of the the hardest part of it against fencing somebody with that style of.
It's so weird because most people just have something that's round. You're like, okay, well, it's round. That thing, you can pivot your wrist and do all kinds of things. And every time I've faced one of those, it's like, oh God, that person is really into sword and buckler and they've really practiced and they really know what they're doing that thing. And there's some really wacky things you can do with that, especially the way the two dishings on either side of the center line are. It just stops your weapon cold. The other one that's a close second is the 8-pointed ones that are like, like the spider web.
Oh yeah.
Those are pretty rare. A couple of folks in the sport have those. They're nightmarish, but not that bad because they're generally metal and generally I can skip off of those. And as long as you don't commit and like really pound deep into those dishes, you're fine. But the one you just showed, those things are, the times I've seen those have been, they present a lot of problems. So beware of those.
Good to know.
Oh, hey, Marlene, by the way, my buckler is 2 pounds, 3.2 ounces. I think you were tired that day.
3. Yeah.
You were tired that day, I think.
Probably. Was it a Thursday? Was it after ringing?
Yeah. It was like at the end of a practice. You're like, oh, let me try sword buckler. And I was like, here you go. And I think you were just worn out. So don't call my buckler heavy, man. Put that thing down.
I was just guessing and was wrong. Maybe I just need to get stronger. I've got these little spaghetti arms.
That's what I need to do. That's for sure.
Okay. So this is what you've got, what I'm talking about on there.
Oh, neat.
With the spike. So when you hit it, it sounds ridiculous, but it works.
It's a good reason to put the leather on there so it doesn't have that sound.
But but you can imagine once you get a sword coming in between here, if you can see that, then that's when it jacks it all up.
Yeah. Yeah, getting in the coil there probably is not fun. Although I wonder if it might be an effective way to trap or parry a sword. I'm actually, sorry, everybody.
It didn't trap it at all.
No, okay. All right.
I'm like, we're getting into like the sword breaker look if you leave it exposed.
Yeah, right. So there's a couple things as I'm kind of, as we're talking here, I'm leafing through this book. And one of the interesting things that I am finding is that there are a lot of extant examples of bucklers that have like I don't know if you can see, but they have a hook on the front of the buckler.
Like a hook?
They do like a hook, like a little like. What am I doing here? It's I don't
know. I'm like a hook.
A hook. Yeah, like an honest to God hook. And also, this book postulates that they weren't actually used for like trapping swords. They might not have been affixed in such a way that it would have been effective for them to do that. And some of these are awful small. You might again, this is really bad, but like you can see like right here.
Yeah.
That hook is tiny, right? There's not a lot of clearance, and it probably is not going to be a great way to trap a blade coming in, right? It would probably take some real doing.
Would it be easier to deflect a buckler using the hook then?
I think what this book is saying is that the hooks were they might have been for wearing or like a strap that you would have used to carry a buckler. Because that was my other question too, is like a sword and buckler, especially around the time of Manuscript 133, were you would see them depicted in like scenes of warfare, right, in like marginalia and things like that. But I think you would be more likely to see them as kind of an intermediate sort of like civilian gear sort of weapon, right, or weapon pairing. So you would have a sword on your hip and also a buckler. One of my questions was like, well, how do you carry that, right? And one of the answers is like a leather strap, right? Either around your arm or around your hip with a hook, right? So you can just pull it off and have it ready to deploy at a moment's notice. I really wish I wish Charles was here, because I imagine that he might have some good insight on deploying weapons in a short amount of time. But So yeah, that seems interesting. I would have thought that, having a hook on the front like that might have lent itself more to, a functional like sword trapping sort of thing, because we see spikes, right?
Mhm.
I know I've seen a museum example that has like a lantern in it as well, right? So
Yes.
there are, there's arguments to be made that some of these are, they're a little more practical in other ways as well. But yeah, I don't know. For the most part, you're not going to see any of that stuff in like 133.
I'm kind of surprised that they would have a separate hook for mounting when you have, I don't know. Now I feel like we need to have one with a hook so we can check the different mounting styles to see how quickly it is to deploy.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting.
Because that would indicate a crossbody, right?
Maybe again, like having it slung on a leather strap and hooked on might, if you can like lift it off, with your left hand, it might be on the same side as your sword, because you cross draw with the sword and then pull the buckler out with the same, having go to the same side instead of having to like cross sides or anything like that. But also sort of paradoxically, this book also thinks that maybe that wasn't it either, right? We just don't have enough information, which is, kind of a problem that we often run into in HEMA, right? It's like we just don't quite have all the information we would want about stuff like that. So question mark, big old question mark there. Some blanks that we need to fill in. Sometimes we have to, put some frog DNA in there to get the the results that we want.
One theory that's been, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying a question mark is shaped like a hook, same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, one theory that I've heard is first sword in 133 is, first sword. So you have your sword down at your left hip and your buckler is down there with it, or down in roughly that region. Some theories are that this is you grabbing your weapons and preparing to deploy them. Some people don't like that theory, but the positioning would at least match up.
This is I don't think this is specifically a Roland Varzeka theory, but this is one that he espouses especially. So first word from 133, as let me see if I can give you guys kind of a rough idea. So you might see it depicted with the buckler straight out in front, but the hallmark of first word is that the sword is actually under the arm. Mm-hmm. And as Joe is saying, we see that it is kind of like a primary sort of motion after grabbing and drawing the sword to have the buckler out and the sword literally underneath the left arm, ready to deliver a cut.
The buckler extended, or is it relaxed?
I've seen interpretations both ways, right? I've seen the buckler sort of closer into the body, sort of at a medium distance, right? So it's not extended fully and it's not totally collapsed. But if we look at it from the perspective of the first motion you make after you are deploying a weapon, right? If you are having to both draw your blade and draw your buckler at the same time, you might come to a place where the sword or the buckler is close to your body, as is the sword underneath it. One of the things I've also seen is that this is the buckler is basically covering, right? So it's not it might not necessarily be out fully, right, providing you all of the protection that it could. It might be angled slightly, and your arm might be collapsed a little bit to prevent a blow coming in from the right from above, which is again, everybody's right-handed, not everybody, but might have been a more common attack to guard against. One of the, and this is where it starts to get a little esoteric, but I think one of the first plays, let me see. The first play of 133, I think, is actually from the first ward. And I want to read the text because it is a little counterintuitive to what you might think you might do. Let's see. Okay, so in the first part of 133 here, after it talks about the wards, it talks. You can see on the on the left here, we've got our is that our student or our priest? That's our priest. Our priest, you can see who is standing in first ward, right? He's got his sword. The buckler is collapsed, right? It's actually not out in front of him, and we can see the sword underneath his buckler arm. Whereas the student here is standing in seventh ward or long point, Longadorn. The first part of this play says, note here that we show the first guard or underarm, and the opposition is half shield or Hauptschild. There are some interesting interpretations of what a half shield is. You hear and see half shield come up a lot in 133, and I won't dive too deep into that right now. But it goes on to say, and I advise with good counsel that he who stands in underarm should not deliver any blow, something that is rationally demonstrated by the Outkersleben, for he cannot reach his opponent's upper part. If he attacks the lower part, it will be dangerous to his head. But the one who adopts the opposition can enter and attack him at any time if he omits what he ought to do, as is written below. So this is kind of an admonishment against making a, certainly it would be hard to perform a cut from above from a guard like first ward. And as the text says, if you are to make a cut from below while your opponent is standing with his point or edge on line, right, and threatening you, the only real option you have to defend yourself is going to be your buckler at that point, because his blade is closer to you than your blade is to him, right? It's got to come out. It's like a almost like you're standing in long point in longsword and your opponent is standing in like Schrankhut or Nevenhut or something. So something where he has to travel a much further distance in order to get to you than you do to him. The other way I've seen this interpreted, this play, is not to set up a hew or a cut, but is actually to set up a sneaky thrust. There are some really interesting ways that the sword and buckler work together to again to displace the opponent's blade and buckler in such a way as to perform really interesting thrusting motions, and also the slicing cuts we see as well. And I want to say that, like, as the sword ends up under here, right, it comes over the top almost like a
like a schnappen.
Like a schnappen, exactly. Like a schnappen that turns into like your buckler covering for you against, the blow coming in from the other side, and then like you making a cut with it. It's like I said, there's a lot to take in here. But it definitely is there. You're going to see a lot of parallels with something like longsword. I think it's a really good idea, to have the basis in longsword, which I think most people who are getting into HEMA are going to be more familiar with anyway, because it's going to take a lot of what you learn there and is going to either subvert it completely or expand it in a really interesting way.
It seemed like there was some Lichtenauer overlay when they were like, well, obviously you can't attack to his lower because he has your head, which is similar to what you would hear from Lichtenauer, especially when he's like, those that go low, you
Right.
shuttle them in the head.
As
Haven't gotten
Lichtenauer
that far yet.
is
but-
want to do. Let's see. So let's we'll go on with the play here. It says when half shield is adopted, right, or half shield, right, as our student is in, as opposed to our priest, right, who's still in first ward. Fall under the sword and shield. If he is ordinary, he will go for your head. You should use a thrust strike, Stichschlag. If he counterbinds and steps, your counters should be a shield strike or Schildschlag. So he goes on the play here to indicate that if indeed, right, you come up under his sword, which is what it's advising you to do, not as a cut necessarily, but as to prepare you to displace and make a thrust, right? If he goes for your head, as he might, right, then we're going to use the thrust strike, right, which you will probably be using. You'll probably be making blade contact, right? It starts as a wind, right? So you're winding to his inside, clearing your space, using your buckler to cover, and then delivering a thrust. If you make contact and he counterbinds, then you're actually using the buckler itself to create the displacement and follow through with the thrust. So again, a lot of just really neat and interesting and sometimes really counterintuitive stuff in here. Stuff you might not expect to be included in a source with sword and buckler. Maybe you would. I don't know. I'm not you. It is about 9:35 by the village clock. So I think we've kind of reached our time limit here. I would like to open up the floor again briefly to address any questions, or if anybody wants to jump in with anything else that they think is interesting or might be unclear to them about what sword and buckler fencing is, or any other resources that you might want. I'll try to post some links in the event page. I don't know how long it's going to stay up, but
it's there. You can access it. If so this goes for any of our events, right? That have event links in Facebook. If you go to events with the new Facebook layout, let me actually walk through it so I don't misspeak, right? So we go, it's now at the top. So events, and then from there, you should be able to, yes, just scroll now and the past events are there. You don't have to click and then find past events like you had to before.
cool.
Except for those of us who have no Facebook and don't do things like that.
Heyo, so when Dave gets those links posted, I'll get an email together and blast y'all.
There you go.
That works. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying not to use Facebook as much these days either, so an email would probably be not a bad idea. Yeah, so anything else anybody wants to add? I realized that as much as this was supposed to be a discussion, I ended up talking a lot. So if anybody wants to add some final thoughts, I'm all ears.
So when do we start up the study group?
That's a great question. Whenever it's appropriate to do so, given these uncertain times.
So
what
I have
oh,
news.
So go ahead, Marlene.
That might help with this. So as of so straight up, you guys have until tomorrow, not tomorrow, Friday, to do your responses as far as who's coming to one-handed sword practice on Thursdays. It will most likely be rapier at 6, longsword, and then after that, we may see a breakout of Messer, Saber Dusac, and I know, Michael, you had said that you wanted to do sword and buckler, and I personally am more interested in sword and buckler than I am Messer and Saber Dusac. So I would prefer to do a sword and buckler breakout, just for my own selfish needs.
Yeah, I'd totally be down for that.
So Dave, if you want, we can video you in, because I know it might be a bit of a hike.
Yeah, might be.
Unless you're willing to crash at somebody's place. I mean, the bed's here if you want.
Well, yeah. Well, let's talk about it. I'd be willing to join in live via satellite, certainly. And if not, I mean, just to join in, discussions,
right?
And, talk with folks. I think that would be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Can you show the flex question on the Type 14?
Yeah.
Real quick. There was a good picture of the Type 16.
So the flex it's pretty stiff.
Okay.
Like I said, this thing is pretty chunky. There's a lot of presence there, as opposed to, let's see, the Type 16 is a little better.
Yeah.
I still wouldn't want to get a full thrust with either of these. I think it would be better than, I don't know, something that wasn't supposed to flex. But yeah, these things are pretty stiff.
How much speed do you sacrifice with the longer version?
Not a lot. Certainly, I think not a lot to make much of an appreciable difference. Again, having handled both, like the Type 16 is probably the one you'd want, or something more akin to the arming sword that Michael showed us. Something a little longer with a slimmer blade profile would probably be the way to go. The Type 14 is neat. Like, I like it. I think it's pretty sexy. But you sacrifice a lot of distance. Like the length is not insignificant.
I'm a little person, so.
I mean, whatever. I can bring them by. You can try them out and see what works better for you. But I would say that the Type 16 is probably the best compromise, right?
Okay.
It's going to be the best amount of length versus speed versus blade presence in the bind and stuff like that. I mean, it's not bad. The Type 14 is just like, I don't know. It's a fun experiment, but I probably wouldn't want to fight earnestly with one.
For the sake of hurting your partner?
Well, and also because I feel like I'd be losing a lot of reach.
Wow.
Like let's see. I wonder if I can kind of show you. No, that's not gonna work. I don't know why I'm just not doing it the other way. Tell you what, I'll just tell you, and you can just take my word for it. But I mean, you're looking at least 2 inches. Like, it's a not insignificant amount of blade length. But then again, I mean, the distances are pretty short to begin with in buckler fencing, sword and buckler fencing. So once you get inside somebody's guard, having the extra width and having the extra weight to push somebody's sword around might not be a bad idea. But I think it would kind of come down to personal preference.
Fair's fair.
I will say in general, I can blow through people with my messer, because that's what I generally tend up using when I'm doing sword and board. But going back to the pinnacle of sword and board these days, Dave Rao, he swears by a longer weapon, and that allows for some very artful sniping. So you gotta.
He's got that toe thrust down.
Oh yeah,
pat.
absolutely. And Dave Rao is not exactly the tallest guy either, and he's still managed to pull some very amazing things through tactics as well. So my point there being short blade with a base. You can blow through people. Quick whippy blade that's got length. You can do some artful things. It's how you want to fight. But I would offer that it seems the meta these days favors the long that are definitely longer than what I think the original I-33 envisioned. I-33 was written at a time when swords were not that long and that whippy. They were still pretty short. I was having a pretty in-depth conversation with Sam Kovic of Castile Weapons. We were discussing making a proper I-33, simulator, and one of the recurring themes was, yeah, they're really cool, but you're going to suck in tournaments. And eventually we dropped it. And by the way, if you haven't heard, Sam may have lost his shop out there to the fires. So keep a tab on him, by the way. Hopefully he can recover. But that was definitely a core part of the conversation. We were talking about, him making, if you've ever played with a Castile weapon, everything he makes is amazing. And we were talking about that, but I think the conversation died largely because as cool as it would be to make one, I think he realized that making one was probably not all people are going to get it, because a lot of people prefer to use the very long, whippy, side sword things for modern sword and board that we see today. So just food for thought when contemplating what to acquire. I'm still using my messer. I still use my Albion. I love it. I can blow through people, but I still get picked apart by people with talent and range. reach. Run by reach, and if you do not get in tuck and break quick and tight quickly, you're going to get picked apart. So does one follow the other. Just beware of what you've got in your basket. If I could, I've got the mic and I've got the floor. Got like a room for here, a room for ringing. We got a room for and we've got rooms for lots of things. We do not have a sword and board room, so maybe that's a thought. I know not everybody has Facebook, but just we do have specified, CKDF rooms for everything, but I do not think we have one for sword and board. So just food for thought.
Will, can you confirm? Is that for real? We don't have one for sword and board play?
I don't think we do.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay. Perhaps we add.
I smell an opportunity.
Vaguely related, but not really. Marlene, I know you're the one that's played with TOTA or whatever it is. The that other.
Traditions of the Ancestors.
That's the one. I got it right. Does it have a way to post articles, not just videos? Because that might actually be a good place to put the links from this.
Yes, it does. So I think because we are, and I'll confirm with Kiana on this one. She's like, this is her brainchild. I think the way it works for CKDF's TOTA page is it's closed the same way our Facebook is. So you would have to request admittance into the group, and I am an admin, so I should be able to add you. And once I add you saying, yeah, you're cool, then you can share your articles and videos, images. You have the ability to comment and like have actual like scholastic discussions on this stuff in a pretty, like, the site itself is pretty reputable. They're working, so Kima Alliance and Kiana are working directly with the developers to make sure that what they're trying to set up is like a scholastic discussion area for HEMA, so we can get away from the
Facebook.
Yes, from what Facebook is and what Facebook has become with its like multitude of groups and things that like if you talk to people and like reputable HEMA people, then you're in reputable HEMA discussion groups, but it's very easy to get like lost in the hubbub if you're just starting out, if that makes sense. So TOTA's trying to be that educational source, like on top of Works an Hour. So like you have Works an Hour for reading, and then TOTA's the social space where you like discuss the projects and things that you're working on.
Yep. I was just thinking that would be a good place to put, to start directing people who don't have Facebook, since that came up with the whole, where do we get the links?
Yes. Yeah. And I'll double check with her to make sure that that's something we can do. That was on my list of things for this weekend to figure out and tackle.
Good, then I didn't give you extra work.
Nope, but it's a good reminder.
Well, all right, folks, any other final thoughts before we call it a night?
Yes, but I can bug you offline.
Fair enough.
I know where to find you.
That's right. Well, in that case, I would like to thank all of you for being here. Thank you for the excellent questions. Thank you for the spirited discussion. And I hope that this has been helpful to kind of point you in a direction that might be interesting or fun, or might kind of re-spark an interest in a style of fencing that is maybe not as prevalent as something like longsword. But again, more than anything else, just grateful that you all were here and hung out with me for the last couple hours.
It's not like it was hard, Dave.
Oh, well,
we all had fun.
Oh, good. All right. Well, if you had fun, then I had fun. So again, thanks for coming, everybody, and see you out there.
Thank you.